Right, good evening. Now, I better make sure I'm standing in the right spot so you can all hear me. Hello, good evening. Thank you for inviting us along. As Paul, thank you, said, my name's David Krause. I'm the president of the Gawler Club, and co-hosting with me tonight is Vice President Norm Lange, who's also our IT guru, and he's put the slideshow together. One thing that we will, I guess, perhaps struggle with a bit is that the people right down the back will probably struggle to see some of the detail of some of the pictures that we're putting up for you tonight. But move forward if you want to come and have another look later on, or ask us if you want to have another look at something, then just let us know. We do have a number of the club members here tonight, probably at least 12 to 15, I think. It's a pretty good turn-up. Some of us are identified by the fact that we're wearing our sparkling 150th birthday shirts, and some of us are here incognito, and I can promise you that we don't have a secret handshake, so you don't need to watch out for that. Now, we'll just let Norm bring up his presentation, and then we'll get cracking. I'm hoping that we can get through this probably in about 40-45 minutes, and if I see people nodding off, I'll either have one of our members stand up at the back and make a loud noise, or we'll do something to bring you up again. But I'll try to keep it entertaining, and so long as Norm can get his presentation up. We did have some lead-in music.
Yeah, it's up.
For those of you with good hearing, there'll be a quiz on this later.
Yeah. So you have to do something with the display. Right. I'll turn that down. There we go.
Okay, we're up and running. It's always good when IT gets sorted out inside 10 minutes. Okay, so what I'll do, well, I'm going to touch on quite a few different aspects of the Gawler Club, so bear with me. You're getting the full story, so I hope you enjoy it. I've given the title to this talk as the Gawler Club, a little known icon of Gawler. So the Gawler Club would like to thank, firstly, the Gawler History team for inviting us to present our history to you this evening. The late Brian Tom had been trying to organise this event for several years, but the club desperately needed more time to research its history and to get its facts straight before going public, which is what we're doing here tonight. And that we've got them straight now, we believe, just recently on the publication of the club's history in a book put together by John Burton, with significant editorial support from Robert Laidlaw, the two gentlemen sitting just down the front here. Many of the stories, pictures and facts that you hear and see today are sourced directly from our new book. So, a bit of question for you guys first. Who here had not heard of the Gawler Club until recently, or even today? Okay, well that's good. That means the majority of you had heard of it, which is good. So the club hit a significant milestone in its long existence through celebrating its 150th birthday in February of this year. The well-attended celebration of this milestone celebrated with a long lunch for past and present members held in the Gawler Institute, and it was indeed a day of the book launch. It was unfortunate that Brian Tom is no longer with us to hear the club story. As John Burton said a while ago, let's hope Brian perhaps has good internet connectivity in heaven, and then he might be able to see the YouTube of this presentation. The Gawler Club has indeed existed in Gawler almost continually for 150 years. Whilst being the oldest club in Gawler, it's not quite the oldest in the state, but it's not far off being that either. The only clubs in South Australia which predate us are the Adelaide Club, founded in 1863 in the city there, The Port Adelaide Football Club was established in 1870, and the South Australian Cricket Association was established in 1871. So we're up there with the oldest in the state. Unfortunately, much of our club's history remains unknown and effectively lost to the past, and people keeping the stories to themselves and not really saying much about the Gawler Club over the decades. It has, of course, survived 2 world wars, a major depression, and the recent global scourge that was COVID-19. We're still all here. The club has had several shifts of clubroom location throughout its life. However, it has always existed due to the very generous and continual landlord support of the Gawler Council, which has always ensured that the club had a place to meet. Now, there's controversy to that as well, and we'll hear about that a little bit later on. So who of you here tonight thought that the Gawler Club was and/or is indeed a gentleman's club? Be a few hands surely coming up. Very early in its life, the club temporarily ceased operation and then recommenced under a new name called the Gawler Whist Club. Whist being a game that's long gone, I believe, but some of you may know what that is. I personally don't even know just how to play it. But the club started out as the Gawler Club, and very soon after it became the Gawler Club, it changed its name to the Gawler Whist Club, and it changed its principles and rules on what the club was about, and that was due to a little bit of public pressure about what Gawler Club was all about, and we'll hear about that a little bit later on as well. So as we understand it, the reason behind this name change was to placate a number of local citizens who failed to see the desirability and relevance of its existence as a private and rather exclusive businessmen's club in the township. Only a few years after this change, the name was changed back to the Gawler Club, and so it's continued to this day, and hopefully for another 150 years. So, how was the club founded? The Gawler Club was founded on February the 22nd in 1873 for the exclusive use of professional and businessmen of the town. Mr. George Palmer, manager at the time of the Gawler branch of the National Bank, was the driving person behind its formation. While established to essentially be a place for male members of the Gawler gentry to socialise, the main activity conducted within the club was that of the play of the table game called billiards. Initially, the club had 34 members, but unfortunately the names of neither office bearers or the ordinary members on its commencement are actually known. There's no record of that. A few years later, however, the membership was recorded as shown on the screen. Now, I don't know whether or not you're going to be able to read some of those names, but for those as I'm speaking to a history set of history aficionados here for Gawler, I imagine that quite a few of you will recognise some of those famous names in terms of what's appeared on street names and suburbs and all sorts of things there. So just running through some of them: Turner, Rudell, Thornley, Oldham, Newman, Ferguson, W.F. Wincey, that we'll hear about later on again, the Brights, Chapmans, Dawsons, Duffields, Gilbert, Harris, Hawkes, just touching on a few more: Martins, the Piles, Redigers, Wilcox, Robertsons, Dr. Popham, the name Reed is there. So there's quite a few famous names there. And up on the screen there's just a few photographs of some of those famous people. W.F. Wincey, who was the Mayor of Gawler at the time, on the left there, and James Martin, second from the right, probably being the two most famous.
Turner was the Attorney General.
And, so the gentleman...
F.F. Turner.
Yes, F.F. Turner in the centre there was the Attorney General for South Australia at the time as well. Okay, so moving on from that, the club has to date only ever acquired one single major piece of sporting equipment, being its magnificent Alcock billiard table, purchased back in 1873, along with many of the accessories which the club still has in its possession today. The full-size billiard table, measuring the standard 12 foot by 6 foot, and known as the canted leg model, was purchased new by the club from its manufacturer in Melbourne, Alcock & Co., a company started by Henry Upton Alcock in 1853. The table number is 788, and each individual part of the table is individually numbered as such. and that's how they used to just track. It's essentially a serial number, and there's only ever been one table number 788 as far as I know, and that's the one we've got, and that's still recognised today. And obviously back in the 1800s they used to proudly put on some fairly intricate little plaques and things to note that. The way they used to differentiate one table from another was essentially the leg style, believe it or not. So these tables have got 8 fairly large legs to support the weight of the table, and this was the canted leg model that we've got. And you can see the photograph on the left there of the styling of the major piece of sporting equipment that we still have from the very outset of the club. Only in 1957 did the club purchase a second smaller table, enabling the club to participate in the Small Table Billiards Association of South Australia. In 2019, the club decided to update its small table, and fittingly we purchased an antique 8 foot by 4 foot and Alcock Bijon table with a wooden top, and we believed it was manufactured in around 1920. So we're very lucky to get that. I'll just call on Norm now to give our first reading of one of the Bunyip articles from back in the day. You'll hear from Norm a few times, and we've got quite a few articles out of the Bunyip which have recorded part of the Gawler Club history as we've moved through the decades.
Thanks, David. My name's Norm Lange. I've been a member of the club since 1996, living in Gawler since the mid-80s. And it's my pleasure to be here tonight and share our story with you. So most of you can probably read that, but I'll read it if it's a bit hard up the back. So this is from the Bunyip of February the 22nd, 1873. The Gawler Club was founded. A number of gentlemen of Gawler and its suburbs have recently formed a private club and engaged the underground apartments of the Gawler Institute for the accommodation of its members, the club being conducted on the plan of those in Adelaide. Much discontent appears to have arisen on the account of the Institute having been allowed to furnish apartments for such purposes, considered by cautious and reflective people as being at variance with the design of the literary and scholastic establishments known as the Institute. So we've been rebels from day one.
So as far as we know, that was the first article written about the Gawler Club, and it's not flattering. It sort of suggests that there's discontent from the outset, even back in 1873, just like it would be now. Probably more so now. If such a club was set up for the exclusive use of certain people, and that it was actually, what would now be called ratepayer funded, essentially, in terms of a club being able to use a room. There was a lease arrangement with the council, and there was an annual lease paid by the Gawler Club to the council, but many people didn't see the humour in that. So, what goes on in the Gawler Club? We actually play cue sports, so we're essentially a sporting club. Billiards and snooker mainly, with the relatively recent addition of 8-ball, and we play all of those 3 in our tournament series every year. It's as simple as that. So, given that we are a sporting club, you're not going to get away without hearing a little bit about the 2 games that are our mainstay games that we play, billiards and snooker. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of the history of the 2 games, which might be of interest to you. So the table game of billiards has been around for hundreds of years and is believed to be an original table game that led to the many variations of such games, including snooker and 8-ball. Ironically, as snooker and 8-ball became more popular, billiards became less so, even though it is still played by many great players around the world today, and also at the Gawler Club. As you can see there, billiards is played only with 3 balls. That might be a surprise to a lot of people, and on a 12 by 6 table it looks like there's not a lot going on, but when you start to play there actually is a lot going on. So I'll just give you a quick spiel on the origins of billiards. So the history of billiards actually begins in the 15th century. The game has been played by kings and commoners, presidents, ladies and gentlemen. The game was invented somewhere in Europe, however there's argument as to just which country can claim that honour. The French believe that the English invented the game, but at the same time the English thought that the French did. Evidence suggests, however, that the game originated in France. It evolved from a lawn-based ball game, similar to croquet, and play eventually moved indoors to a wooden table covered in green cloth to simulate grass, and a simple border was placed around the table edges to contain the balls. The balls were shoved rather than struck with curved wooden sticks called maces. The term billiards is claimed to be derived from two French words, the word billiard, a wooden stick, and billet, a ball. Allegedly, King Louis XI of France, who was around in the 1400s, had the first known indoor billiard table, and Louis VIII declared the end of the Regency at the Louvre by climbing onto a billiard table. So there you go, they're even in history. So that's billiards, and I will now talk to snooker. So that might look a little bit more familiar to some people. There's a triangle of red balls down one end and some coloured balls scattered around the table, and that's set up ready to play. So the game of snooker was invented by British Army officers stationed in India sometime after around 1850. However, it was only in 1875 that snooker gained its identity when Army officer Neville Chamberlain, stationed in India, devised the set of rules that are the basis for the game played today. The good listeners out there will note that Gawler Club had already indeed been in existence for 2 years before snooker was actually officially invented. So hence the Gawler Club, often known as the Billiards Club, there's a good reason for that, because there was no snooker around at the time that the Gawler Club actually came into being. So in the 1870s, billiards was popular among British Army officers stationed in India, and several variations of the game were devised during this time. A similar game, which originated at the officers' mess of the 11th Devonshire Regiment in 1875, combined the rules of two pool games, pyramid pool and black pool. Snooker was further developed in 1882 when its first set of rules was finalised by British Army officer Sir Neville Chamberlain, who helped devise and popularise the game at Stonehouse in a place called Uttakamund in India, on a table built by Burroughs and Watts that had been brought to India by boat from the UK. The word snooker was, at a time, a slang term used in the British Army to describe new recruits and inexperienced military personnel. Chamberlain apparently used it to deride the inferior performance of a young fellow officer at the table. Snooker first appeared or featured in an 1887 issue of The Sporting Life newspaper in England, which led to a growth in its popularity across the Indian colonies of the British Raj and in the United Kingdom. In its early days, it remained a game mainly for military officers and the gentry, and indeed many gentlemen's clubs that had a snooker table would not allow non-members inside to play. And I think the word gentry rings true when you consider that often you see snooker players wearing bow ties and waistcoats and generally quite well dressed, which means that it wasn't a pub game, it was a game played by the well-to-do and in a royal sense, I guess. Okay. So they're the two main games that we play. As I said before, we also play 8-ball, which is the more familiar game that you will see played in hotels and clubs and things. We do play it on both sides tables, so it is a bit unusual for 8-ball players to have to play 8-ball on a large table, but it challenges one's skills. So, the club's pride and joy is that table. I'm just going to talk a little bit to the history of the table that we've got now. Okay, all right. We'll just also show that we do have some other games that have been played over the last 100 years, including table bowls. I don't know whether anyone's ever seen that played on a large table before. But for those of you that are familiar with the game of bowls, those balls do have a bias on them, just like regular bowling balls on a green do, except you use a little ramp to launch the balls. The balls are quite small, probably the size of an egg or a bit bigger. Yeah, it's played on the green. That is the snooker table, the billiards table. And the set of balls that we have there are indeed, they belong to the club, and we don't really know how old they are, but one would hazard a guess to say they're well over 100 years old. Thanks, Norm. So to our table now. The club's now antique, full-size 12x6 table made by Alcock & Co. is made with cedar framework and quite a unique blackwood fiddleback cushion rails, which are the edges there, which are the main part of the furniture, other than the legs, is the rails around the side of the table. So fiddleback essentially means that the timber is cut across the grain rather than along the grain. Alcock & Co had an agent in South Australia at the time the club purchased the table, and that man was called Fred Lindrum, the great Walter Lindrum's grandfather. Now, we'll hear about that name a little bit later. Some of you may have heard the Lindrum name at some stage in history, but it's quite famous in the sport that we're in. Has anyone here heard of the Lindrum family in South Australia and or associated with billiards? Okay. So the Lindrum story is fascinating and unique over the generations. So Fred Lindrum was one of the South Australia's greatest winemaking pioneers, believe it or not. And in 1873, he was awarded Australia's first international gold medal for wine at the London International Exhibition of Fine Arts, which happened to be the same year the Gawler Club was founded. Fred Lindrum also became Australia's first professional billiards champion. So from that perspective, South Australia has quite an identity in the world of billiards, given that Fred Lindrum was a local. In 1867, Alcock was commissioned by the Government of Victoria to prepare a table as a gift to Prince Alfred, the Duke of Edinburgh, which was the second son of Queen Victoria. From then on, many of the Alcock tables had a special plaque attached, which had the wording, Alcock & Co, manufacturer's appointment to His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh. And it also had the coat of arms for the Duke of Edinburgh. And the Gawler Club's table has such a plaque, so it has royal links as well. In 2019, the club decided to have the table fully restored, so it was in original condition up until then, and that coincided with the club's movements in and out and back into the area that we're in again now during the Civic Centre's renovation. The table's original stain and lacquer were removed in a bath of acid, and then all of the cedar and blackwood timber components were tediously sanded back by hand to rejuvenate the 150-year-old timbers. The table was finished with just a clear coating, so the natural grain of the beautiful timber can be seen, and new cushion rubbers and a new cloth were installed to finish off the job. And that was done in Adelaide by a professional restorer. The club members couldn't quite muster the technique or time to do it ourselves, so that was done by the professionals, and it was a great job. At weighing over 1 tonne, moving such a piece of sporting equipment from a basement location to the restorer's location in Adelaide might have a few of you wondering, how does that happen? Well, the answer is, as you can see on the screen now, the table comes apart into quite a number of pieces. The slate, I think, is in 3 or is it 4 pieces, which is dovetailed together, and all of the rails come off, and it's not moved as one table, as a lot of the tables more commonly seen on the domestic level. The smaller 6x3 or 8x4 tables are often one piece, so they're a lot harder to move than the big tables, because the big ones actually come apart, which is just as well. So it's brought back into the room in pieces. The photos that you see there are the reassembly process, post-renovation in our new rooms, and once it's in place, it doesn't go anywhere unless you get the professionals to come back and move it. So if you think moving a piano is hard, try moving one of these things. So now we'll just go back to something we've mentioned before, the Lindrum name. I've titled this part of the talk, The Club's Greatest Moment. Back in 1926, Walter Lindrum, who's one of the most famous billiard players in the world, in the history of the world, Walter being effectively the Donald Bradman of billiards, actually made an appearance at the club in 1926. Now, Norm, have you got a video you'd like to roll?
Walter Wally Lindrum was thought by many to be the greatest billiards player the world has seen, and is often referred to as one of Australia's all-time great sporting heroes, along with Donald Bradman, Dawn Fraser, and a horse named Farlap. billiards is played on a table approximately 2 metres by 4 metres and requires 2 cue balls and an object ball, often red. The name of the game is to score either a fixed amount of points or a number of points by striking both the object ball and the opponent's cue ball in the same shot, potting either the red ball or your opponent's cue ball, or by cannoning either the cue ball or red ball into the pocket. So good was Lindrum that in 1933, a rule change brought in to beat him was unsuccessful as he went on to win the World Championship that year.
Well, the Lindrum will now oblige.
By the time of his death in 1960, Lindrum had held the world speed record, aggregate points record, highest individual points record, largest winning record, fastest break, and the fastest century, scoring 1,011 points in 30 minutes. He had also held the World Championship from 1933 till 1951.
So acknowledged as the world's greatest billiard player ever, Walter Lindrum entertained Gawler Club members on the 22nd of December 1926. At the time, he held the world's highest break of 1,417 points. A break is when you go up to the table and you just keep playing and playing and playing and your opposition falls asleep on his chair while he waits for you to finish your break. So he made 1,417 points without stopping. But later in 1932, he made an amazing break of 4,137 against Joe Davies in London, which is still a record which stands today. As a result of that famous break, the authorities at the time changed the rules of the game to try to stop him from being such a dominating force. Walter Lindrum has been called the Bradman of billiards, although there was a far greater inequality between Lindrum and his opponents than between Bradman and his. Walter is recognised as the fastest scorer in the professional ranks and was the master of what are known as the nursery cannons. Probably the greatest moment ever recorded in the Gawler Club. Back in 1926, the Walter Lindrum gave an exhibition game and a display of fancy shots on our table, the very table we play on today. To make the exhibition more interesting, club member at the time, Mr. F.E. Barkler, consented to being his opponent for the demonstration game. I don't imagine there were too many volunteers. In 1 hour, Walter scored 1,125 points against Barkler's modest 98. Members were amazed at Lindrum's control of the ivories and were astounded at how he played with an ease that almost reduced the game to an absurdity. A special cue was released after his 4,137 break, and the Gawler Club is lucky enough to have one of these very much sought after cues in its possession as well. We also have an original Alcock cue that came with the table, and also the cue that was used by Mr. Barkler when playing against Lindrum during his visit to the club. And all 3 cues are now proudly stored in a display case in the clubroom. Norm's now going to read an article about that visit. It's interesting in the sense that as to the way it was written at the time, the English they use and the way they talk about it. So Norm, thank you.
Some of those lines are also in this, but this is from a Bunyip article from December the 22nd, 1926. Walter Lindrum at the Gawler Club. A most entertaining evening was spent in the Gawler Club Institute building. Mr. Walter Lindrum, the holder of the world's highest break of 1,417, gave an exhibition game and a display of fancy shots on the table. Although Mr. Lindrum's greatest break is that, he has numerous high breaks to his credit, whilst he is recognised as the fastest scorer in the professional ranks. To make the exhibition more interesting, Mr. F.E. Barkler consented to hold a stick. And until Mr. Lindrum found the strength of the table more than held his own, executing some very clever shots. Ultimately, he became back number, the visitor giving a remarkable fine exposition of all-round billiards. In an hour and a half's play, he compiled 1,125 against Mr. Barkler's 98. His principal breaks being 216, gained in 12 minutes, 182, and several over the 100. At one time, Mr. Lindrum made 100 in top of the table cannon, so he basically was just at one end of the table. Just a cannon is where your ball hits the other 2 balls, and you only give up a shot if you don't do that. So he just kept going. His control of the Ivories was astounding, and he played with an ease that almost reduced the game to an absurdity. The cue came easily to either hand, and the rest was seldom called for. After fancy shots were demonstrated, his good night number being exceptionally brilliant, he opened by firing the red ball into a big shake basket. Basket is like a big woven bottle, so to speak, forcing the red ball out again on the table, so it spun and then the red ball came out. The evening concluded with a crazy ball drop cannon competition amongst the club members, the game being introduced by Mr. Lindrum, who donated a billiard cue to the most successful opponent. Competitions caused much hilarity as the balls introduced were freaks that would roll and twist in any and every direction, completely nonplussing the player. They basically was a billiard ball that was weighted off centre, so when it rolled down the table, it would then roll to one side, so it never played straight. Their antics on the table were ludicrous and instanced that the play was more of luck than skill. Mr. M.F. Othams ran out the lucky winner, the run-up being Dr. Gillen. As a result to Mr. Lindrum's visit, billiards should gain a fillip in club circles.
And if you're like me, I don't even know what some of those words even mean anymore. I'm going to have to Google that when we go back. Okay, on to the next part of the talk, the Gawler Club locations over the last 150 years. And we do have some pictures that will come up as I talk. So the Gawler Club has had a continuous tenancy with the Gawler Council for its entire existence. The support it has received over the years in ensuring its continued existence has been quite remarkable, and we're truly grateful for that ongoing support. And we certainly look forward to continuing that good relationship with Council into the future. The club rooms have been located in just a couple of different council-owned venues over the entire existence of the club. So in 1873, the Gawler Club original location was in the basement of the Institute. The Institute Committee were looking for a tenant for the front rooms of the basement, and they saw an opportunity for justifying its fit-out if indeed it was leased to a tenant. The new Gawler Club became that new tenant, and the committee fitted out the rooms at a cost of £67.70, and then let it to the club for a yearly rental of £35. So that's why the council thought that was a reasonable deal. In 1880, the Gawler Club moved to the underground rooms at the Town Hall and remained there for 3 years, leasing it at £50 per annum. In the early 1900s, as we heard earlier, the club changed its name to the Gawler Whist Club. As I said, we're not 100% sure why, but presume it was done to satisfy a general dislike by many of the townsfolk of the so-called Gentlemen's Club in the Town Hall. In 1904, the Gawler Club, which was still the Gawler Whist Club then, moved to the James Martin Room of the Institute, which is the foyer of the main Institute Hall. And that was at just £14 per annum. So I'm not sure whether it depended on who was in council at the time or who was a member or what, but the rents seemed to move all over the place, and there's no rationale for that we know of. At some stage soon after 1904, the club's name was changed back to the Gawler Club, but we don't know exactly when that happened. In 1930, the Gawler Club moved again due to the remodelling of the Institute and relocated to the rear of the Institute, where residential quarters were located at the time. The club occupied 2 rooms on the ground floor. And now we go all the way through to 1985. In 1985, the Gawler Club moved back to the large room in the basement of the Town Hall so that the library could be expanded. Whilst the club was not asked to pay any rent at this time, in 1990 the committee voted to voluntarily pay council $200 per annum for the lease of the room as a means of re-establishing a more formal tenant-landlord relationship, which had become quite a casual arrangement over the years previous to that. In 2017, the Gawler Club was relocated to the Gawler Elderly Centre, making way for the much anticipated renovation and expansion of the Institute and the Town Hall. And this was the first and only time that the club has not been a resident in Gawler Civic Centre. So after 2 years of those renovations, in 2019, the Gawler Club returned to the extraordinarily well-preserved and presented basement of the newly renovated Town Hall. The club renegotiated and signed a lease with the council for its ongoing tenancy in the basement, and anticipates being there now for many years to come. And the photograph there now shows the renovated room that we now occupy. If you go down into the basement of the town hall, there are windows that look in onto the table, so you can have a look through the windows. For those of you a little bit more curious, we can talk about that later as to how you might want to come down and join us for a social night or something. So now we're going to talk about membership, the who, what, the when and the why, at least as far as we know anyway. Over the years, many local business owners and professionals have been club members, and the most prominent being perhaps James Martin. For much of its existence, indeed, only men were able to join the Gawler Club. In the early years, they apparently had to own a business in the township or be of professional status. However, in later years, club membership was open to any male whose application was endorsed by other members and subsequently accepted by the club's committee. What about the women, I hear you ask? Well, I'm glad you asked. Only in 1990 did the club's first and only constitution, better late than never, penned by John Brereton sitting there and by yours truly, both quite new members to the committee at the time. We actually wrote the constitution. It was based on, I think, the Gawler Golf Club's constitution, if I remember correctly, as a guide. And we actually wrote it in specifically as a gender-neutral document, with a specifically gender-neutral stance on club membership. And so the club has been gender-neutral since 1990. And the club has ever since that time promoted the option for women interested in snooker and billiards to indeed join the club as full members. In 2014, the club accepted its first 2 female applications for membership, and since then several others have joined the club. Despite our best efforts, we've still had only a handful of women join over the years, and we currently have 2 female members, both of whom are well engaged with the club's tournaments and social gatherings, and both of whom are actually here tonight. We've had some pictures of life in the club up on the screen as I've been talking, I think. It's a very much a social atmosphere, and it's social up to the point at which we start playing tournaments, at which time it gets a little bit more serious, and I'll talk to that in a little while. A few years ago, we looked at having a juniors competition. Although the Constitution prevents people under 18 years of age from being regular members, we did several years ago, the club's committee decided to trial a junior development program aimed at children of all ages, at least those who could play a cue sport properly on a full height table. At its peak, the program had about 12 junior members joining in the fun, many of whom were children of full members. They even competed in their own tournaments, and it was great to see the kids, who were mostly in their early to mid-teens, showing an interest in our cue sports. Whilst the program enjoyed limited success, it proved somewhat challenging to keep them interested, and so many came and went, presumably to focus on either their studies or other sporting interests, or perhaps just their phones and Facebook. Membership size. For much of its existence, the membership has been around only 30 to 50 members at any given time. The maximum number, which is set at each AGM for the year ahead, has on many occasions been reached, and a waiting list has been in place. Particularly through the 80s when I joined, there was a waiting list to get in. So it's nice to be popular. Currently we have just under 40 members, so if any of you women and men out there are interested in playing some recreational snooker or billiards, and you're serious about it, and then you can, and to be an active part of our social fabric, then please speak to one of us. We've had some famous members over the years, so just looking at the original members list over the period 1873 to 1931, we can recognise many very well-known Gawler names, as I touched on a little earlier. So I'll just read the list. Riddell, Pyle, Martin, Knott, Popham, May, Harris, Jacob, Barnett, Rice, Withers, Freeman, Forgie, Day, Barkler, Antwis, Richards, Duncan, Law Smith, Carter and Cheek. Beyond the 1930s, we see the names of Winnan, Lyons, Ware, Diekman, Nottle, Boucher, Busbridge, Brereton, Lucas, Simpson, Harnett, George, Lipsis, Doldig, Tiller, Haynes and Scoose. I'm sure there wouldn't be anyone in the room who wouldn't know some of the either the original people with those names or at least their descendants in Gawler. Many members have held very important positions in the town, and several have been mayor and or elected council members and even members of parliament, L.S. Duncan for one. One of the Gawler's grand mansions, Tortola at 3 Dundas Street, was built in the early 1870s by Mayor William Faulkner Wincey, who died in 1894, and then sold to Alfred May, one of the May brothers, and both were early members of the Gawler Club. And we only learnt about that more so recently because the mansion Tortola is up for sale, I believe. So if anyone's looking for a historic mansion in Gawler to buy, that's the one.
1.6 mil.
Yeah. Like any club, there's always a list of club stalwarts, and ours goes something like this. So in terms of longest membership in the past 6 decades, the oldest longest membership is held by Robin Tiller. He's been in the club since 1972, so he's just clocked over 51 years. His son is here tonight, Robert, who's also a member. Barry Hitch, who joined in 1982, has racked up 41 years. John Brereton, our illustrious Secretary-Treasurer, has been in for 40 years. Phil Zoynett, sitting at the back there, has been in for 39 years. And me, I joined only recently, in 1988. So I've only been socialising and playing there for a meagre 35 years. The Gawler Club has granted life membership for outstanding service to the club to only 12 of its members in its past 150 years' existence. The first being Corporal Laurie Harris in 1924, a World War I veteran. After a long gap, Cyril Winder was made life member in 1980, followed by Albert Weir in 1981, Eric Footer in 1982, Garth Busbridge in 1989, and then Alwyn Busbridge in 1993, Bruce Finch in 1995, Ken Brereton in 2000, Robin Tiller in 2000, John Brereton in 2007, Steve Winder in 2012, and Phil Zoynett in 2016. And we have the honour roll there, the picture of the board on the right with the Gawler Club life members listed on it, as well as some pictures of those life members there on the left. The Gawler Club has a club patron. In 2010, the club members decided to establish the new role of club patron in order to recognise the significant role that the Gawler Council has always had and will continue to play in its past and future successful existence. Brian Samble, Mayor of Gawler at the time, was approached and he gladly accepted his invitation to be the Gawler Club's very first patron. Brian was then and still is now a great supporter of the club, and he was instrumental in making sure the Gawler Club remained viable as a long-term tenant in the basement of the Town Hall. In 2014, Mayor Karen Redmond was asked to be patron and she graciously accepted, and she remains our keen patron and our #1 ticket holder today. Karen was instrumental in ensuring our continued operation during the recent renovations to the Town Hall, encouraging us to work with Council to find an alternative temporary lodging for the club during that time, and of course in supporting our return to the magnificent new Town Hall and its extraordinary basement area. Without the outstanding support and encouragement from both Brian and Karen as our patrons, the oldest club in Gawler may not have survived to be here to talk to you today, and for that we're of course eternally grateful to them. So going back a little bit now into some of our history, we do have members who have served in the war. 12 members of the Gawler Club served in World War I, and their portraits are proudly displayed in the club room. And those portraits are shown on the screen there now. Their names were Leonard William Barkler, Percy William Colbert Beadnell, Patrick John Broderick, Walter Henry Crozier, Edwin Charles East, James Graham Forgie, Laurie Arthur Harris, Eric Henry Lewis, J.R. Patterson, Walter Francis Pickering, Harold Christopher Pritchard, and William Bilson Sims. Sadly, James Forgy, who's on the bottom left of the photographs, was killed in action in France on the 26th of April 1918, and he was 26 years old. Laurie Harris was awarded the Military Cross on the 2nd of July 1917 for conspicuous gallantry and devotion to duty through displaying great courage and coolness in leading 2 bombing attacks. Although wounded himself, he carried on his back a wounded fellow officer to safety during the heat of battle, and he was awarded accordingly. So it's great that we've preserved that history of our war veterans, and that's proudly displayed in the club, as well as the Gawler honour rolls, which are in the foyer just outside the club. Okay, our tournaments. The club's mainstay activity each and every year, and held from June to October, is its game tournaments. The tradition of this member-only knockout competition for the serious and very competitive play of snooker and billiards, and also the game of 8-ball in recent years, dates back to the early 1900s. Each year the names of the tournament winners and runners-up are painted on the honour boards. So the oldest board we still have dates back to 1914, and unfortunately we have no records of the tournaments held prior to that. So enduring is the club's tournament tradition that only in exceptional circumstances have the tournaments not actually been held in any given year, such as during the war years, the Great Depression, and of course during the recent COVID-19 pandemic. The main social event on the club's calendar is the end-of-year dinner, at which the tournament winners and runners-up are presented their trophies by the club's patron. Perhaps the most exciting and pleasurable part of being a club member and tournament contestant is to actually see your name painted onto the winner's board. It's one of the few ways that our names can actually be immortalised in some way other than ultimately on a headstone. Of course, some of us have had their names painted on the board more often than others. Whilst the handicapping system used has helped many of us to make it onto the podium at some stage, there is one member who has dominated many events over the past 30 years. I won't embarrass him tonight by naming him, but he is here. And I say that whilst both Norm and I would probably just point over in that direction there. If you're looking for the best player in the club, he's just sitting behind the returning officer. So the boards are proudly displayed around the club, and it's always nice to reflect on the winners from years gone by and to look at all the names of the past members. So now just moving on to some of the historical club artefacts that we still have in our possession. We still have the original club rules. We're unsure when these rules were written, but the president at the time was William H. Cox, and the secretary was P.J. Broderick. Some of the examples, now I'm expecting you all to be able to read that. I can't from here, but I'm sure someone can. It just gives you an idea of the font. Any gentleman over the age of 21 shall be eligible for membership. He shall be nominated in writing by 2 members approved of by the committee. The club shall exist for the use of its members and for the purpose of playing billiards, cards, chess, dominoes, and any other games as may be approved by the committee. And one other point, no gambling allowed within the club room. The club also has some financial ledgers from way back, covering the period 1924 to 1979, and it's by far the oldest and most enduring formal club document that we have. Having said that, unfortunately we don't possess many committee documents from the past 150 years. Rumour has it that one of the secretaries many years ago had a disagreement with some members and removed and presumably destroyed many of the old minute books and financial ledgers. And as you can see there, not that you can read it, but it probably looks fairly typical of other old ledgers from years gone by, where it was all neatly handwritten and documented. We have an Anzac book. The Anzac book was kindly presented to the club by Corporal Laurie Arthur Harris, the club's first life member. And this book was written and illustrated in Gallipoli by the men of Anzac in 1915. And we see a picture of that on the screen there now. We also have the Alcock game accessories, which were the originals that came with the table, and they're all circa 1870s. So the club's Alcock table purchased in the 1870s came with accessories, which the club still has, which these artefacts include a beautiful cue rack, a balk ruler, a D marker, the triangle for the snooker red balls, a smothering block to set the nap of the cloth on the table in the correct direction, a leather Kelly pool container, and the scoreboard, many of which are still actually in regular use today. We still use the same items regularly during our games and social nights. Up on the screen there you can just see a picture of the display case that we've had some of these items preserved in. Again, proudly displayed in the clubroom. There are some original billiard balls there. The 3 cues that we mentioned earlier and zoomed in on the end of those cues, you can see that it's the one that was celebrating Walter Lindrum's world record break, as well as the cue that I believe that was the one that was used by Barkler, was it, John? Yep. So in terms of the club milestone celebrations, for its centenary in 1973, the club held a special dinner in the Prince Albert Hotel. As mentioned earlier, in February of this year, the club celebrated its 150th birthday with a gala luncheon held in the Institute's main hall. Attended by 70 people, comprising past and present members and special guests Mayor Karen Redman, local member for Light Tony Piccolo, and Council CEO Henry Inat. It was the largest event known to be held for and by the Gawler Club, and it was a wonderful afternoon. And we've got some of the photographs of that event showing up there now. At that event, Mayor Redman presented the long service or long membership awards to Barry, to Robin and to John as well. And we also got her to cut the birthday cake. So, who here has watched an episode of Pot Black on the ABC in the 1970s? Let's reminisce.
And that was a success. Success. Nobody had been able to do it before because all the balls looking grey.
For those of you in black and white, it's the green over that bottom pocket that he's looking at.
In 1969, when I first put Pot Black together, I couldn't get 8 players. There were only 7. Pot Black was born by creating a professional of the amateur champion to make up 8 players.
At the moment, Charlton, with a break of 8, sits right in the middle of the Reds.
When I first started, there was no such things as commentary boxes. I sat innermost an audience whom I was scared to death might hear what I was going to say. So I talked very quietly into the microphone.
The culmination of 16 weeks, the grand finale, and it's the defender versus the challenger breaking off.
The big break came for me was getting invited into Pot Black. I mean, that was the big thing because it got your face known around the country.
Dennis Taylor making his debut and at the same time an in-off giving 4 points away.
The grounding you got just playing that one frame enabled you to cope with all sorts of pressures later on in your career.
A big smile.
What the professionals of snooker are receiving today is all down to that funny little program called Pot Black.
So hands up who's watched an episode of Pot Black in the 70s. And I wonder whether you didn't even realise it, but you had no interest in snooker. It just happened to be a show that came up and was kind of fun to watch. And I know I did as a young lad, and still don't know why I was watching it, but it certainly got me into where I am now. So we've got a few more stories from the Bunyip, if you bear with us. Norm's going to read a few more out, and the Bunyip's been a great source of the recording of the history, as I'm sure you all well know, being the Gawler history team. So not surprisingly, the Gawler Club has, especially in its earlier years, attracted the attention of many Gawler citizens who had an opinion about the so-called exclusive gentlemen's club resident in the basement of a ratepayer-funded council premises. The wonderfully local and ever-present Bunyip publication, as I said, has provided us with many record of the club's name changes, reputations and goings-on in the past 150 years. And Norm will just read a sample of these out now. Thanks, Norm.
We have an article here from April the 28th in 1876. Open column, Gawler Club, to the editor. Sir, The Bunyip has from time to time contained letters reflecting on the above club and censuring the Institute for letting rooms in this institution. I think the club, as a perfectly private affair, is justified in not taking any notice of the said productions, but when letter after letter is allowed without contradiction to retail uncharitable and unfounded insinuations, and the Institute is unreasonably made responsible for imagery abuses, it may suffer in the opinion of the public, which certainly would be a pity. Signed, not a member of the Gawler Club. In July 1881, a meeting of the Gawler Club was held on Monday last at the club room when there were 11 members present. Mr. Riddell occupied the chair. It was resolved that the old club be wound up with a view of starting it on a fresh basis. A committee of 5 gentlemen was appointed to wind it up and report at a future meeting. It is intended that the new club shall be formed on a more liberal basis and be less exclusive than formerly. It was reported that there would be a small deficiency, but it would be guaranteed by the old members. We understand that fresh rules are to be got up and that the hours of opening and closing the club will be definitely fixed. Because they had issues late on summer's nights, people in the reading room, and with all the windows being open, they could hear the clunk of the balls in the club. In 1901, the Gawler Whist Club, an innovation in club life recently took place. The newly formed Gawler Whist Club, having taken the basement of the town hall, signalled the opening by inviting ladies to be present for that evening. The ladies apparently appreciated the idea and expressed a wish to again have the pleasure of an invitation. The club has purchased the handsome billiard table from the late Gawler Club and have had the room refurbished, even though the table never moved, making a cosy and compact place of meeting. The popular medico, Dr. Popham, is the president. We understand the number of members is limited and the affair conducted purely on cooperative principles. And from 1930, Gawler Club versus the Gawler Bowling Club. Another most enjoyable evening was spent on the Gawler bowling greens on Wednesday, where habitues of Gawler Institute club played members of the Gawler Bowling Club. 20 members from each club played, and the eventual winners were the Bowling Club 100 to the Gawler Club 90. At the conclusion of the match, a tasty supper was served. In 1950, billiards tournament. Next Tuesday evening in the Gawler Club rooms at the Institute, 7:30 p.m, a team of 4 from both the club and the RSL sub-branch will be matched at billiards. New chalk of special qualities presented by a member of the Gawler Club team is expected to carry the side to a victory. Light refreshments will be served. They liked eating, didn't they? 1951, Gawler Club has a win at snooker. Defeated previously at billiards by a Gawler RSL team, the Gawler Club had revenged at snooker last Friday night on the RSL clubroom table. The Gawler Club team, which won 3 matches to 1, comprised of Messrs B. Schwarzkopf, Estronauden, A.V. Carter and ABP Ware. The RSL team was Messrs F.P. Mulrooney, L. Slade, H.H. Baker and Mr. Riggs. And I think that's it.
Thanks, Norm. So, in the home stretch, nearly done. We mentioned the Gawler Club history book a little while ago. To mark the 150th birthday celebration, the collated history of the Gawler Club has now been preserved in an excellent book, and that was written and edited, as I mentioned earlier, by John Burton and Robert Laidlaw, and it's been printed locally by Peter Ashcroft at the Print Market. It was released at the club's 150th birthday celebration in February, and it can be purchased to interested parties for $30. We do have some here if anyone's interested in acquiring one of those, but certainly if you don't want one tonight, you know where to contact us if you do want to get your hands on one at some stage. And that just shows the front cover of the book there. So it's come to that time of the night now where I need to ask you the obvious question: are there any questions? I know we've occupied a lot of your time tonight and I appreciate your attention, but does anyone have any questions that you might want to fire at us.
Yeah. Got one, David.
Paul?
Well, now you've got 2 tables, is that correct?
Yes.
You've got 40 members plus looking for more people.
Yep.
How do you actually schedule a game? Because they take a bit of time to play, don't they? So
Yeah, they
you
do.
have to sign up to play at time or schedule, or yeah.
Not really. So members have access to the club during hours, business hours obviously, as well as into the evenings. So the council allows us free movement in and out of the basement and into our rooms. So we all have our own keys to get in. And so people can schedule games whenever they want. There's never normally been a clash. The only time it gets busy is during the tournament season. And then people do need to schedule games to play. So just for everyone else's sake, Paul was just asking how with only 2 tables we have 40 members able to play games freely and not being clashing with other people's timings and so on. It's never been a problem. That's the bottom line. So there's always plenty of time to sneak in and have a game with someone. We do have social nights about every 6 weeks or so, where members get together on a Thursday night. That's the main time when we see the core team of members who come down and like to socialise. Other members get together just amongst themselves and go down during the week. There's still a couple of different groups, I think, that go down of an afternoon during the week. And then we'll see each other again at the annual dinner or during the tournament events. So, no, it's not normally a problem. Any other questions?
Yeah, just secondly one to that. What's
Yep.
the cost to join?
Remind me, it's $100 annual membership, and there's a joining fee of $70, I think it is, which covers the cost of a shirt and the key, the swipe pass and stuff like that. But essentially it's $100 for regular members per annum. Yeah, no, it's not unreasonable at all.
And it's 10 cents a game.
And it's still 10 cents a game, and there is a sign in the club there somewhere, which was printed up a long time ago, and yes, there was a per game charge as well.
Can you play for money?
No,
Oh, but okay.
no, there's no payment. Not to my knowledge anyway. There's no play for money.
Just lost a potential member.
No, we just lost the potential member. Sorry, Paul. We'll see what we can do.
David,
Yes, Lance.
I'd just like to make a comment about Mr. Perce Beadnell, who was listed on those members at World War I.
Yep.
He was my trainee when he was working he was the CEO of the Muddawera Council, and he wanted to retire.
Really?
And I was lucky to get the job and work with him for 4 years, and I had to be just 21 to be able to take office, because that was the age of maturity then. And he actually stayed on until he was 79 before he walked out the door and retired. So it makes me feel old to think that I linked up with someone in the First World War.
Well, you certainly don't look it. So for anyone who couldn't quite follow that, Lance Hatcher has a direct connection with the gentleman Beadnell, who was one of our war veterans. Believe it or not, Lance doesn't look 160, but gee, he's going well. So yeah, very interesting. Thank you for that insight. We should try and record that somewhere along the way. Thank you. Now, there was one other question. No, there's one here. Thank you.
Yeah, you had a photo of Walter Lindrum's gravesite.
Yes.
Do you know anything about that? Where
yes.
The pool table.
Yes.
With all the accessories.
Yes. Do we know what's the location of that?
Melbourne.
It's in Melbourne. Yeah, there you go. So, yeah.
Beautiful piece of work.
Yes, it is. Yeah, that's why I didn't talk to the picture, but it is a picture that's in the book, and it's quite an ornate and unique memorial for Walter Lindrum, as it should be. Yeah. Now, Helen.
I actually had the same question, but we did have a descendant of Walter Lindrum's come to the club as a didn't we?
I met a descendant of the Lindrum family from the winemaking Lindrums when I was in Sydney in 2001, 2002. I think it was probably a granddaughter of Walter, or part of the Lindrum clan anyway, because Lindrum Wines was still active then. I'm not sure whether they are now. But when I was in Sydney, I actually met one of the descendants. So, yeah. Any other questions? 3, 2, 1. No, gone. Thank you. Okay, so on behalf of the Gawler Club Committee and membership, I'd like to thank you all for having us here tonight, so that we could share with you some of the rich history of our club, and hopefully you walk away feeling enlightened. And I'll just emphasise again the fact that this history of the club, to my knowledge, has never been presented in a public forum before. So it's unique. You're the first ones to hear about it. And as I said, if anyone is interested in looking at joining us, you're more than welcome to let one of the committee know, myself or Norm or John. Yes, there is. There's a social night next week. As I said, every 6 to 8 weeks we hold a social night. The next one is actually next Thursday night. And so we normally encourage people who are interested in looking at membership to join one of us as a host at that social night. It just goes for a couple of hours from about 7:30 to 9:30 or so. So come down and have a look. But please let us know early and we'll arrange to meet you outside at 7:30 in Murray Street and take you down. So on that note, I'll thank everyone for coming. Thanks to the members who've come here to support, and Ros, lovely to see you here. I hope you've enjoyed the evening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. It's very enlightening. I really enjoyed that. I'll just ask my wife Anne to come up and do a vote of thanks, please. Thank you.
Firstly, thanks to Norm and David for choosing us to be the first people to sort of hear your presentation. That was wonderful. I have a little note here from the president of the Gawler History team, and he says, I have to say, my husband used to wag high school to play at the Salisbury Pool Hall.
I'm still a crappy player.
So congratulations to the Gawler Club on your 150 years and your book on its history. The things that I learnt tonight were that quite a few of us here didn't really know what the Gawler Club was, that we weren't really aware of its existence or what it did. And it was very interesting to sort of hear that even back in the late 1800s, the community voiced their concern about the club and its use of the institute. I thought that was interesting. And I had never actually thought of billiards, snooker or 8-ball as being a sport. Something I learned about tonight. So it was a very interesting, informative talk, so thank you very much. We are now going to present a basket of goodies as a thank you.
I have to train her better than this, I'm afraid. Okay, so as you're aware, the regulars that we always give a basket. In this case, it's a cardboard box of thank you for tonight. Now, there's a lot of goodies here from Sheets Apples. So I think David and Helen get all the chockies, and Norm, you get the fruit. I get the fruit. Good man. Okay, so thank you very much again, and thank you. There you go.